Hi, just so anyone knows, I'm doing a YouTube about my story and about changes for the court system. If you hear my birds in the background, don't mind at all. So if you hear strange noises, that's what it is. Hi, my legal name is Bethany Ann Farmer Bailey. I was born on March the 12th, 1987. I call myself Bethany Ann Farmer, however. The corrupt Ohio Juvenile Court, along with my biological father, William Bennett Bailey, Jr., have decided to change my legal name to Bethany Bailey. So you can call me Bethany, since that's the only name the court and I agree on. My mom, Peggy Ann Farmer, filed for divorce shortly after I was born. My parents lived together for a grand total of 1 summer, 1 Christmas, and 25 days after their marriage. I spent more time with Bill, my biological father, during my visits with him than my mom ever did during their marriage. My mom had full custody of me from the time I was a baby until after we left America. Visits with Bill started off completely unsupervised. When I was 17 months old, Sylvia Campbell and Tammy Bean, workers at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center daycare, called up an emergency child abuse hotline after seeing the typical condition in which Bill would return me to the center. I had various burns on my body, some of which the doctors declared to be cigarette burns. I was dehydrated and dirty, and I would scream hysterically when people tried to change my diapers. I had my only ever vaginal infection to date. The doctors concluded with absolute certainty that I wasn't being cared for properly. That wasn't their only concern. They told my mom they noticed my vaginal opening appeared widened, and this could mean sexual abuse. My mom didn't want to believe this could be true, because her family wouldn't do such an awful thing. She decided not to bring forth accusations until it could be verified that I was being sexually abused. She wanted full proof, because she did not want to make a false allegation. At this point in time, the case was in front of Judge Sandra Beckwith. She didn't have time to hear the case, so the litigants were told to come to an agreement in the hallway. This suited Bill, my biological father, as he was panicked that the judge would find out about my vaginal infection. So, in exchange for my mom not telling about the vaginal infection, visitation would be laxly supervised by my mom and grandparents, and Bill chose to have visits at their farm because, as he later wrote, it was like being unsupervised. Time passed and things changed when I was turning 4. The case had now been transferred to Judge Deborah Gaines, teamed with referee Kathy King. Suddenly Bill was pushing for unsupervised visits and began filing against my mom, claiming she was refusing him visits with me. This was false, as my mom let him spend more of my waking hours with him than with her, and she was giving him lots of extra visitation time. He then really shocked Mom by accusing her in front of the referee of fabricating false sex abuse charges against him to keep me from him. He accused her of calling the abuse hotline on him as a campaign of alienation against him. Bill never legally proved that my mom was refusing visits or that she was alienating me or fabricating false abuse stories against him. Worse yet is that the sexual abuse and refusal of visitation were 2 different topics that had no legal bearing on each other. If he wanted to accuse my mom of false sex abuse charges, he should have filed a separate complaint about it and not drag it into court as a hypothetically, distantly related link. Referee Kathy King allowed both topics to be investigated simultaneously as if they were one and the same thing. Because of Bill's absurd claims, the referee blinded herself to any proof of abuse presented as defense later in court. This made it easy for Bill to sexually abuse me at 4 years old, because any mention of abuse would reflect poorly on my mom, not on him. Legally, none of this had anything to do with whether or not my mom was refusing visitation, which was the legally filed issue before the court. Sexual abuse was not the filed issue. My abuse, or lack thereof, had nothing to do with the topic at hand. Even had Bill's absurd alienation claims been true, which they weren't, that would in no way demonstrate whether or not my mom refused visitation. Likewise, even if the referee did assume that my mom alienated me, it does not negate the fact that my father could also have been abusing me simultaneously. Hang on just 2 seconds. Proving or disproving alienation should never be the sole means by which one determines whether a child has been abused or not. All in all, we didn't get a full and fair hearing by far. Sexual abuse wasn't brought into court by my mom, but rather by Bill himself, not for the purpose of investigating abuse or even refusal of visitation, but rather to give the false impression of PAS, parental alienation syndrome, by my mom via false abuse, sex abuse allegations. Discovering my mom's supposed reason for refusal of visitation wasn't going to further the court's investigation as to whether or not visitation was actually refused or not. Even if one naively assumes that Bill was suggesting that my mom refused visitation because she falsely believed that sexual abuse was occurring as a means of showing that she had motive, one is still faced with a legal problem. Motive, even if proven, isn't proof of the existence of a crime. And motive on my mother's part wouldn't prove or disprove whether I was sexually abused. When I was turning 4, Bill began to come more frequently and was getting very hostile on visits. More so than usual. Bill began insisting that the door leading to downstairs, where he preferred to spend most of his time with his visits, remain constantly closed. He insisted that the volume on the film of the TV that I was watching on TV be kept at the maximum volume. So he'd turn up the volume to the maximum on every film that my mom would turn on for us to watch before the visit would begin. He began insisting that the lights downstairs be kept off and would scream at anyone if they tried to turn the lights on. What concerned my mom and grandparents is at the start of each visit, he would throw a temper tantrum and scream threats involving court sanctions if anyone so much as dared to open the door during visitation. Bill was sexually molesting me during these so-called supervised visits. Sometimes, when he'd finish one bout of abuse, he'd release me. When this happened, I'd run upstairs, curl up in a ball in my mom's lap, and start sucking my thumb. Bill would then stomp upstairs and demand that my mom and grandparents send me back downstairs. Bill would smirk at my mom and lean his head on the back of the couch with a look of satisfaction when she would send me back downstairs. My mom became alarmed by the other symptoms, so much so that she brought me to see 2 different child psychologists, Dr. Cynthia Dember and Dr. Michael Romanek. I began praying at night for the angels to let me die. I became fearful, clingy, and reverted to baby talk. I began wetting my bed only on nights when visitation occurred. I also began to have wild night terrors. During one of these night terrors, my mom remembered that I woke up screaming, "Get the hair out of my pee hole." I started to practice masturbation, and I tried to molest my mom and Aunt Becky using the same language Bill had used when abusing me. Bill began to call the police to my grandparents' house excessively, which isn't too surprising since, when he abused me, he told me that my mom would go to jail if I told anyone. Slowly but surely, I began to tell people what Bill was doing to me, even though it was hard. When I told my therapist about it, I urinated on myself out of fear. Curiously, after Bill's visits, I knew that a penis was long and tried pulling on my clitoris to make a penis in order to become a boy. I figured that if I were a boy, Bill wouldn't abuse me anymore. Towards the end of the year, when the abuse intensified, I began to increasingly have blackouts during Bill's visits, despite having a rather photographic memory due to my Asperger's syndrome. The other thing that disturbed my mom was my strange new obsession in looking for stains on the mattress she had put down for Bill and me so we could watch TV. It was hard for her to understand my behaviors. Okay, I need to click down on the computer because I'm reading this off a letter. Okay. Sometime later, though, through a series of events that referee Kathy King accidentally put in place, supervision actually became stricter. As a result, Bill didn't have me alone downstairs anymore to sexually abuse me. Interestingly, there is a medical anomaly that goes hand in hand with abuse. My symptoms mimicked this anomaly. 1 month after I turned 6 years old, I began growing a lot of pubic hair, but only in the places where Bill had focused his molestation. The rest of my pubic hair, in the untouched places, didn't start growing until I was 14 years old. Referee Kathy King seemed uninterested in hearing testimony from my mom to discover the truth. She court-ordered Dr. Cynthia Denver to work towards unsupervised visitation. My mom didn't want to make abuse accusations without proof, even with all of these symptoms. But eventually, when Dr. Cynthia Denver was told of the various symptoms and events, she disagreed with the idea of unsupervised visitation. Both she and Dr. Michael Romanek insisted my mom call the abuse hotline immediately. My mom called the abuse hotline, not to accuse anyone of abuse, but merely to report it as a possibility, because she was told to report it. As a result of my mom's phone call, a police investigation was opened. The police investigation wasn't court-related and was even in a different county. So my mom figured that whatever happened, there would be a fair investigation. She'd have been right, except for one big catch. The chief of police, Gary Miller, was Mr. Bill Bailey Sr.'s best friend. So obviously, we had a problem. Gary Miller was in charge of my file as chief of police. The investigation went poorly because of my Asperger syndrome and because Gary Miller didn't want Bill to be convicted. Gary Miller lied by saying that interviews took place that hadn't occurred. He quickly closed the investigation, claiming that there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute with. Bill promptly called Gary Miller into court as a witness. Gary Miller falsely claimed that my mom was alienating me and presenting him with junk evidence. This served to compound the problems in our court case. The referee was already practically representing Bill. Now she seemed to believe that my mom had brought forth false sex abuse charges twice. Don't forget, the first set of accusations brought forth against Bill were from the daycare workers at Children's Hospital, not from my mother. Furthermore, my mother only brought forward these charges after being told, basically, that she could lose custody of me if she didn't report it and the abuse turned out to be true. She tried to do the best she could as a parent. I do not blame her. And I want people to understand that she did not condone the abuse, but she had heard of other stories in which people had come forward with more evidence than we had and had their children taken away from them, despite all that evidence. She was concerned that if I was genuinely being abused, that I could have the same thing happen to me if she reported it. She really wasn't sure what to do, and she really wasn't sure whether abuse was occurring or not. Okay, back to my letter. Okay. Now she seemed to believe, the referee, that my mom had brought forth false sex abuse charges twice. Unexplainably, she continued to maintain a hostile attitude towards my mom until our case was transferred into another court, despite the glaring fact that Bill admitted in his final report that my mom never directly accused him of abuse. In fact, despite the orders Mom was given to call an abuse hotline, she refused to even indirectly accuse Bill of abuse. When speaking to the abuse hotline, she merely gave my symptoms and said that 2 different psychologists seemed to feel that I might have been abused because of what they said and because they asked her to call. Nobody could prove that my mom believed that I was abused because she really wasn't sure. Only 1 month before we left America did she actually state that after observing me and my behavior and Bill's behaviors over the years, she had come to believe that Bill probably did sexually abuse me. And I note that she also said probably, she didn't say definitely. So even there, she didn't actually accuse him. The next few years in referee Kathy King's court were hell. Things were so evidently pathetic with regards to the referee's handouts to Bill, because he was incapable of handling the case on his own, and because referee Kathy King pitied him, that people now ask me what kind of services Bill was performing for her. I merely state that I don't know about that, but it's obvious that she felt sorry for him. Many illegalities occurred throughout the years. My mom was forbidden to sell her house. She's legally bound to this day to refer to Bill as Daddy Bill when in my presence, and she has to continue that for the rest of my life. The list of insane orders go on and on. In all the years we were in Referee Kathy King's court, my mom was only permitted to testify approximately 3 times. During the 7 years in Kathy King's court, my mom was ordered the majority of the time to sit in the court hallway while Bill continued to testify as his own lawyer. My mom's lawyer, I've spoken to him, and he says that every time he tried to present evidence, he was told to be quiet, and no one listened to him, and he felt that she was biased. But he could never prove it legally, which was the problem. One day, when my mom was in court, papers were brought to her to sign. The papers claimed that my mom was abusing me. She said she wouldn't sign because the claims were false. She was then told if she didn't sign, I would be removed from her care that day. She signed to keep me safe for a bit longer. My mom's attorney proved in his final argument that she never refused visitation and that all animosity towards Bill was coming from me and not her. Despite uncontestable evidence that my mom never refused to visit, Referee Kathy King put in her final report that she had refused visitation on all the days that Bill had claimed, even though some of them weren't even visitation days. One peculiarity in our case that was demonstrated is that Bill and the referee diagnosed my mom and me with PAS, parental alienation syndrome. Bill presented Gardner's PAS theory along with symptoms he applied to Mom and me that he claimed to be proof of PAS. It was only after this, in juvenile court, that any professional was brought in who diagnosed PAS. So, Bill and the referee came first, chronologically. These professionals were corrupt, did no testing, and referred to referee Kathy King's diagnosis as the standard. Neither Kathy King nor Bill has a psychological degree. All of the psychologists who testified in referee Kathy King's court firmly agreed that my mom wasn't alienating me or manipulating me. Dr. Michael Romanek believed that Bill had sexually abused me. So the referee's conclusions, affirming Bill's PAS alienation version, along with all of her denials that Bill sexually abused me, were based on absurd accusations and hypotheses not presented in psychological evidence, or in any evidence apart from Bill's supposed evidence. No evidence from psychologists. Basically, it was just Bill's word. She just took it. Okay, so, sometime after the referee gave her final report, I was brought into Judge Deborah Gaines' court to testify. Naively believing that her referee did her job, since her report was the only report she ever received, she rubber-stamped everything. I guess that makes her legally liable as well. The judge was in a bad mood that day. She tried to put me in foster care, but because my mom's lawyer refused to shut me up and was willing to go to jail when I was yelling about this decision, she changed her mind. That same day, she transferred our case to juvenile court, saying it was the worst case of PAS she had ever seen. Clearly, the judge felt the referee was claiming PAS, despite the referee only using the word alienating when she and Bill diagnosed us. If anyone ever doubted the referee was accepting Gardner's PAS, they needn't look any further than her source, Bill. Bill was very clear about what he meant by alienation, and even requested that Dr. Richard Gardner be brought in to testify. Referee Kathy King stated that Bill was welcome to invite Dr. Richard Gardner into court so long as he paid for the expenses. The only reason this did not happen is that Bill wanted my mom to pay for Richard Gardner's testimony rather than foot the bill himself. It certainly didn't seem that referee Kathy King was opposed to accepting Gardner's PAS in her court. Finally, since the referee's report was the only report submitted before the judge on such short notice, it seems rather self-evident that the judge didn't pull PAS out of thin air, and she didn't get it directly from Bill. Therefore, it's clear that she got this idea from an intermediary source, referee Kathy King. By the time things got to juvenile court, I had had more than enough. I rarely got to spend quality time with my mom except when she cooked dinner every night. I was forced to put up with Bill's emotional abuse and physical rough handling during increasingly frequent visits. I had been through years of court abuse and had been forced to hear derisive things said about my mom and me. I was becoming suicidal. I was hiding kitchen knives in my room and preparing to say goodbye. I was 8 years old. Juvenile court was worse than domestic relations court. The case was now in front of Kathy Bowler-Koch and Darlene Kameen. Yet, juvenile court didn't have time to hear our case. They only spent about 15 minutes listening to a quack that Bill had hired, who subsequently lost his license. So that was not stable in the least. Two corrupt psychologists, Dr. Roger Fisher and Dr. Sam Robertson, caused problems in juvenile court. CHMC, Children's Hospital Medical Center, and a legal aid lawyer named Deborah Rothstein also got their hands dirty in our case. She tried to give psychological opinions of her own to one of the corrupt psychologists. To put it mildly, I think she had Bill's best interests in mind rather than mine. During the last 6 months of our court case, HCCPS, Hamilton County Children's Protective Services, tried to get involved. During my interview with CPS workers, they tried to convince me that Bill didn't sexually abuse me, but rather that my mom was alienating me. They tried to terrorize me into repeating their lies into a tape recorder by slamming a door, trying to flip over chairs, and screaming hysterically at me. I began to do autistic rocking to calm myself because of how they scared me. As a result, they accused me of being crazy. They asked me if my mom had ever done anything to scare me. I told them once when she got mad, she threw a fork on the ground. The CPS workers then tried to get me to say that my mom was throwing forks at me. I refused to say it, yet they wrote down that I had said it. My mom's lawyer listened to the CPS tape and concluded I had made no such accusation. He also said it seemed as though parts of the tape had been deleted. The CPS workers then asked my mom how often she throws forks at me. She then refused to speak to them without her lawyer present. In response to this, CPS workers wrote that my mom was uncooperative, paranoid, and insane. One good CPS worker disagreed with the corrupt ones, so they fired her, and from what I can gather, threatened her family in order to silence her. She has been hiding with her family for a long time now. My mom left America with me when I was 8.5 years old because the court made it clear they would give me to Bill, and I voiced that if they did that, I would kill myself or run away. But this time I would be discreet so nobody could stop me. My mom realized that I was serious. She had full custody when she left, so she was not found for kidnapping. I admit there were major consequences with leaving America. My mom's salary dropped from $60,000 a year to about $7,000 a year. It has been this way for the last 16 years. We survive solely on our own, with occasional assistance from a few friends. It's a stressful life. During our time in Europe, we have been forced to stay with thieves, have been homeless multiple times, have suffered extreme anti-American abuses at the hands of Islamist extremists, and some anti-American European individuals. The ironic thing is that when we applied for asylum, we were refused because the government in question is politically friendly with America. They also refused because the abuse recorded in my medical records doesn't prove with absolute certainty that Bill sexually abused me. The rest of the abuse was deemed not severe enough to get asylum. People sometimes say we must have made the wrong decision because it's obvious we are suffering here. I disagree. The abuse I've suffered in Europe isn't as bad as what I suffered from the courts in America. I'm still depressed and outraged by the unnecessary pain that was inflicted on me in the first place. But when confronted with a case like mine, you can do several things. 1. Commit suicide. 2. Agree with your captors in order to survive. 3. Leave. The last of these options at least gives a mirage of hope, if not hope itself. The first two options never give one the possibility of hope. One is forever lost. For now, we're stuck in Europe, and I don't have enough money to attend the university. My mom does not have retirement. She cannot get a job here, and I have had many problems with my schooling, with medical expenses, etc., etc. My mom's legal and financial problems, along with the treatment one gets for having Asperger's syndrome in Europe, have seriously hampered my ability to pursue life as a normal adult. My mom now owes Bill $10,000 in child support for all the years we've been gone, as well as whatever sum Bill claims to have spent searching for us. She also has a warrant for her arrest, for not showing up to court after we left America. She was also given a federal warrant for custodial interference, which is to say she didn't give me over to Bill after custody was changed after we left America. She has never been served with any of these warrants and only found out about them years after the fact through non-legal channels. She wasn't around to be told that custody had been changed or that she was expected in court. All of these injustices happened when the juvenile court case was in front of Sylvia Hendon and Magistrate Donald Webb. The injustices began with the power of attorney my mom gave to her parents before we left. She knew that she would need representation after leaving because Bill would try to charge her in court. Her parents hired a lawyer for her named Barry Spaeth. Magistrate Sylvia Hendon agreed. The power of attorney looked legal, but kicked Mr. Spaeth out of court, claiming the power of attorney wasn't valid because my mom might have been legally insane when giving power of attorney. This was based on the notoriously corrupt CPS worker Sharon Evans that my mom refused to speak with without her lawyer. Remember the CPS worker Sharon Evans, who only had a high school diploma, never took psychology, and claimed my mom might be crazy? Now that mom was unrepresented, they could change custody unopposed and give her a federal warrant for not handing me over to Bill. So what does the court do next? Now that mom had no lawyer, they claim the power of attorney is valid. On the day that my grandfather died, the court decided to surprise my grandma by serving her via post to tell her that my mom had a court date. Well, since nobody bothered to inform grandma that the power of attorney was now legal and valid, she signed to get her mail. The moment my unsuspecting grandma signed, she inadvertently validated the legal service of this court demand on my mother. Mom didn't come to court and was given a warrant for her supposed legal defiance. Now she has two warrants. My mom hired two different lawyers to help her clear her name. The federal warrant was cleared readily because it wasn't before Magistrate Donald Webb. They listened to her defense and saw that she was innocent. The local warrant before Donald Webb wasn't cleared as he disregarded everything her lawyer said. My mom's statute of limitations is finished when we were in hiding, so she has no legal recourse. I called up Donald Webb to ask what would happen if mom handed herself in. He accused me of harassing his secretary and hung up the telephone. I had been on the phone with his secretary, the day before, but the person witnessing the phone call felt that I was the harassed party, not the secretary. His secretary refused to call me by my legal name despite my corrections. She kept repeating that she couldn't help me. She told me I needed psychological help because I told her that I'd been sexually abused. I grant that this statement could be interpreted two different ways. Yet, rather than correct my possible misinterpretation, she compounded the problem. When I told her that it's exactly this kind of court disorder that makes me wish to kill myself or my father, she responded by telling me I need psychological help because I'd like to kill myself or my father. The conversation went on and on like this. I still can't figure out how I harassed her, though. If I said anything insulting, I have no idea because I have Asperger's syndrome and am socially retarded. If I did, then I'm sorry. But, in all fairness, she should recognize that what she said seemed very cruel to me. I don't like to be called crazy for reporting sexual